want a low value man. They don't make podcasts. I haven't seen one low value man make a podcast. Do they not know how to use microphones? Maybe that's a good thing. That's hot. All right. I've never seen a man use a microphone for good.
Until now, everybody buckle up. It's low value mail time with your host, Danny Polishchuk. This guest, he is an associate professor of energy geophysics at SUNY Binghamton, and he's worked in Ukraine as part of a U.S. demining research team based out of a U.S. research university in New York. He's working in the context of this conflict since 2015. He has multiple publications on the topic of hybrid and asymmetrical warfare, Ukraine in particular. His name is Alex Nikulin, and we're going to call him up, see if we can get a hold of him. All right.
Hey, Danny.
Hello, Alex. How are you doing?
I'm doing great.
Okay. Thank you for calling into Low Value Mail. I appreciate you calling in. Did I get your last name correct? Nikulin? Is that right?
Yeah, you're good. Actually, like people pronounce it differently.
Okay. Well, I have a little. My family is Russian, so I have a little experience with this stuff.
Yeah. So as you can probably tell, I have family on kind of on both sides of the line there.
Yeah.
Back.
Okay. So I put out earlier today on Twitter because I mean this is obviously the thing that's on everybody's minds, and I don't really pretend like I really know what I'm talking about. I asked my dad and stuff. Maybe I'll have my dad come in because my dad both my family's from Ukraine, but they're Russian. They're like the Russian Ukrainians essentially. But they haven't been there in like 40 years or whatever the fuck. They've been pretty disconnected besides the news. But so I'll ask you. So I saw you sent me a link to one of your papers that you sent me, and it's like basically about like missiles, like anti-tank missiles or some shit. Tell us what you do here. Tell us what you do.
Sure. Yeah. So we basically work on demining research. So when the conflict first broke out in 2014, there was a sense that it might actually end. And when conflicts end, the work of demining begins, and that's what we were doing there. We're basically preparing for that. And I think that we knew pretty early on that unfortunately this conflict was not only was it not ending. It was actually not being frozen like some of the other conflicts out there. Like, like a great example of a frozen conflict is North and South Korea, right? They don't have a peace agreement between them, right? There's this heavily mined area in between them, the DMZ. So,
when was the last time when was the last time you were there?
I was there last time. I was actually supposed to be there in January, but that didn't happen because of everything kind of going on lately. But last time I was there was in 2019 before COVID.
Okay.
So, but you said something interesting. You said something along the lines of, you're not an expert. And the funny thing is that all the talking heads you see on TV, right?
Yeah.
If you go 1 week back to last Wednesday, I mean, it was only a week ago, less than a week ago, about 90% of them said that this war was not going to happen.
Yeah, and almost all of them did.
Yeah, all of them did.
And right? The ones who did say they said it would be like a 24-hour conflict.
That's right, right, and there's this, and because it's actually pretty hard to find people who understand the complexities of that, of the cultural component of that, the military component of that, because even a lot of the journalists, right, they go to Kiev and they live in this little bubble. It's kind of like the green zone, right? It's not really the green zone, but they talk to other journalists. They don't actually, interact with the folks on the ground. They don't understand the complexities of Ukrainian and Russian identity. They don't understand how language plays a role into all of that, right? Because they're basically applying U.S. frameworks to a conflict that is much more complex, right? Because all they want to see is things like language, right? Well, here are Russian speakers and here are Ukrainian speakers. Well, that means the Ukrainian speakers identify with Ukrainians and the Russian speakers identify with the Russians, right?
Uh-huh. That's my parents, basically. Like, my mom says that she had to go to school in Ukraine, but she was Russian, and she hated the fact that she had to do elementary school in Ukrainian.
Right, and a lot of the kind of the American Ukrainians, they mostly left in the 80s and 90s, right?
Yeah.
And if you think about it, 1980 is more removed from today than it is from 1945 in time.
Right.
A lot of things changed. A lot of things really fundamentally changed. I think the problem is that Putin completely miscalculated that little part of it, right? He thought that by going into these Russian-speaking cities like Kharkiv, like Kiev, because Kiev is a Russian-speaking city.
Yeah, Kiev.
Right?
Kiev is a Russian-speaking city.
It is, and it's the capital of Ukraine, but it's mostly Russian-speaking. That's the weird thing about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
There was an expectation, like you said, that Kiev was going to fall in 48 hours. Right, there's going to be no resistance. So if you look at the amount of troops that are engaged in Ukraine on the Russian side, the conservative estimate is about 150,000. If you inflate the numbers, about 200,000. Right.
Okay.
That sounds like a lot. 200,000 Russian troops, like a lot. Ukraine is the largest country in Europe. It is 45 million in population.
Yeah, it's big. It's the size of, they keep saying on the news, it's the size of Texas. And it's bigger population than Canada.
Yeah, and the invasion force was never meant to encounter any resistance. That's the problem. That's what they ran into. And
so now, because I was talking about it earlier, I don't know if you caught it at the beginning, but because I was watching a bit of the State of the Union and he's talking about the sanctions. Do you think like Putin does not have contingencies for all these sanctions? Like, are these really just? I mean, I can't imagine. The population of Russia is super pumped about, I don't know what population, owns real estate and stocks and, but everybody has rubles. I can't imagine people are particularly happy about their money being worth half as much.
Well, there's two things to consider, right? And that's exactly, I think there's two parts to the answer, right? So the first part is that's what the talking heads on TV were saying about a week ago, right? That there's absolutely nothing to gain for Russia if they do this, right? They will lose the oil exports. They will lose the contracts. They will be sanctions. Their aircraft will not be allowed to fly anywhere into Europe or the U.S. There's a lot of money to be lost.
I mean, I just saw just before this started, Boeing just said that they're tearing up all their servicing contracts. So now all the Boeing planes in Russia can no longer be serviced, which for Boeing is a great deal. They're like, we had $300 million or whatever number worth of contracts that we don't have to honor. We just get money for free. Good deal for Boeing. The problem,
and with planes, for them to be flyable, you essentially need to be servicing them like every couple of months. It's like,
Boeing planes, even ones that are services are just falling out of the sky. Like there's there's 737 Max or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So imagine that. So they were fully cut off from that. And I think that's the big difference because people love doing this comparison to the Cold War, right? They love comparing like Russia to the Soviet Union. And there's a fundamental fault in that comparison because the Soviet Union had, it was a poorly run economy.
Yeah.
But they produced everything on their own. So they were really not that sensitive to sanctions, right? They had their own planes. They might have not been great. They had their own, cars, which again, people made fun of. But they had, exactly. But they had four wheels, right?
Yeah.
And so the Soviet economy was very resilient to sanctions. The Russian economy produces nothing, right? So there was kind of this joke going around, like, if you try to support Ukraine by boycotting Russian goods in the U.S., what would you not buy?
Caviar. I was like, I made a joke about it where I was like, I'm going to stop in support of Russia. I'm going to stop, in support of Ukraine, I'm going to stop eating caviar. I don't know.
Yeah, right, pretty much, right? So
I couldn't tell you what else. Like I can't think of one other product. Like I know natural resources, which I've heard some people saying that they're going into Ukraine because Ukraine has tons of resources, but I imagine so does Russia. Like, is it really?
Russia is 11 times. Right? People same way people misunderstand how big Ukraine is. People also misunderstand how huge Russia is. Yeah. Russia is 11 times, right? They don't have an issue of natural resources. They have an issue of being fundamentally a poor country with big ambitions, right? And I think that kind of gets me to the second part of that answer. It's like, why did Putin do it? And I think the answer, which is my theory, which I think was a little bit fringe before, but I think now people are more accepting of it, is that, he essentially lost his mind in a very clinical sense, right? He's no longer rational.
You just think he's just a madman?
Well, when you say madman, people always say, "Oh, that's a crazy person," right? A madman is somebody who's crazy, right? Mm-hmm. And I think the answer is a little more complex, right? I think that he is insane in a criminal sense, where he can remain completely rational, right?
Sure.
Like a serial killer is totally rational. A serial killer is totally logical. He might be smarter than you,
Yes.
right?
But so how do you think that the nukes
right, they're a serial killer, right?
Do you think like the nukes are really in play?
Well, again, I think a week ago nobody thought that there was going to be a massive tank-led invasion of Ukraine, right?
Of course. I mean, it's
pretty
surreal to watch.
I don't want to say that. I really don't.
I
don't think they're.
I mean, regardless of, I don't know if you're trying not to jinx it or whatever, but that's more chick stuff. We don't do that stuff on this podcast. But just, do you think, you saying it's not going to make it happen? But I mean, I feel personally like it's more on the table than it was a week ago. But I don't know if that just seems logical that's the case.
I think so. Yeah. If you put a gun to my head and ask me that, I think the nukes are on the table. And
but again, that's mutual destruction.
I think it's because of this overlying problem that I think he's not fully rational.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you've seen that long table. You've seen how he communicates with people. He's been isolated for 2 years. He's terrified of COVID or whatever he's terrified of.
Yeah.
Right. And he's been in social isolation. Right. Again, I don't want to sound like there's this conspiracy theory that he's crazy. No, I think it's just like when you do that, that's what happens to you, right? If you don't talk to anybody, if you're in effective isolation for that long of a period, you might start seeing things differently, and it shows because the way that this invasion was handled, though it's the information he's received is bad. It's bad intel.
Yeah.
You listen to completely faulty intel.
And is this like do you think he's doing all this for his legacy? Like, is this like, so he's kind of goes down as like a great conqueror or whatever the fuck? Like what is his end game here? Is it really just strictly, we need this strategic piece of the Ukraine just so that any aggressions from the West they're kind of like have a little buffer?
I think that, he was going into this the same way that in his mind, he was going into this the same way, we went into France in 1944, right? No resistance. Everybody's happy to see you because you're liberating them from the Nazis, right? So people are throwing flowers at you in Paris.
Right.
And I think in his mind, he truly believed at his core that Ukrainians in Ukraine were under this, that's what he said, under this Nazi dictatorship.
Well, someone just asked the question. Right? Someone just asked the question, SnickCad01 on Twitch. Is there any truth to the Nazis in Ukraine? Now, I do know that there's the the Azov Battalion, which is like they're like a militia, right? And they are like they have like legit Nazi imagery, and they are, but like they're not the main show in town. They seem to be, just like a kind of small militia.
I think to deny the fact that they exist is that's stupid because they do, right?
Yeah.
But again, it's like you said, it's about their total number versus the population.
Yeah, exactly. Of course, like it's not like a whole country of Nazis. It's like saying because America has 50 Nazis.
And I lived in Kiev for about close to a year.
Okay.
Basically, and it's a diverse city that has a diverse diaspora of very, very different people. Again, there's a huge Jewish population, has a huge African population, right?
Yeah.
So because the people come there to study. The population of Kharkiv, the second largest city in Ukraine, is about 1.5 million people, and about 300,000 of those are students, college students, who come from all over the world, right, to this place because they still, to this day, provide, excellent medical and aviation training and all these other things. So I think that are there not Nazis in the U.S.? Well, yeah, there are, right?
Of course there are. There's some, but like Canada can't invade America.
If you look for them, you will find them. Yeah.
Yeah, but you're not going
to.
Of course, but you're not going to invade them on that pretext. And then someone said, and this is obvious because it's coming up, but the president of Ukraine is Jewish.
Literally, yeah.
Literally Jewish. So to say that there's all these Nazis. I mean,
well, and if you look, and it's more than that, right? The president is Jewish. The Interior Ministry, which is like the head cop, he doesn't speak a word of Ukrainian. Avakov, he does not speak Ukrainian. He speaks only Russian, right? Their main oligarch doesn't speak Ukrainian. Half of the country doesn't speak Ukrainian, right? And again, I think in going back to Putin's mind, he he essentially equated that language identity to their support of Russia. And maybe, if this was 1990, he would have been right. Because, again, in 1990 is probably the last time Putin actually, like, interacted with reality.
Yeah.
Right? That's before he got shielded from this reality by his guards and his planes and his, all of that. But time goes, right? And people interact, and they change their allegiances, if you will, right? So if you look at all those videos on the internet right now, where the Ukrainians are protesting against the troop movements, where they're actually shooting at the Russians, they're mostly speaking Russians.
Yeah.
They're mostly speaking.
You know what? One thing I couldn't get over, which I'm like, this must be just such a problem, but is that because they're all just wearing each other's uniforms? They're all like they're essentially impersonating one another, because that's obviously a good cover. And it's not like going into Vietnam, where it's pretty easy to separate the Americans from the Vietnamese. It doesn't matter what uniform they're wearing. I'm like, this seems like just another.
Sure. So if you want an easy marker to look for, the Ukrainians, typically the Ukrainian military has yellow tape on their sleeves. The Russians will wear white tape.
But why wouldn't you put the different color tape on your, just to kind of be like, I'm just, and then
Oh, and it's done, and it has been done. So when they're trying to infiltrate, that's exactly how they do it, right? Because again, it's pretty easy to do that.
That just seems like a nightmare, because they can all speak the same languages and.
Well, there are differences. There are key linguistic.
Absolutely, there are. Yeah. I'm sure.
Yeah, and even between Russian Ukrainian and Russian, because again, 30 years have passed, and there's the same way you can tell a Canadian from an American and an Australian from a New Zealander, right? There's key words, right? The second that you say, again, going back to a boot, nobody really says that, right?
Yeah.
But the second you hear that, you're like, that's they're dead giveaways.
Right.
But that's to do that, you actually need to talk to them, right?
Yeah. No question. Sorry, go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
I was just going to say, someone has a question. How long, Austin? Someone's asking, how long do you think it's going to take? What? How long do you think the war will be? This is from Gabriel.
So that's a good question. That's a lot. I've been thinking about that a lot, right? I think the initial invasion plan, and this was actually there's a dead giveaway. One of the Russian websites published a pre-planted canned piece, I think 2 days ago. Basically, we've taken Kiev, and the Ukraine surrendered. It's something they put it on a timer, right? Because that's when they were planning to take Kiev.
Yeah. Like they just were like, it'll be done by that point. And so
exactly. So and obviously they're nowhere near. They're nowhere close to that. And again, it's because they've encountered resistance that they were not expecting. And the problem is their force again is relatively small. It's only 200,000, even if you're going by.
Yeah, and and from what I understand, once you spread out all these people over this giant landmass, over 4 axes or whatever, like it's really not a lot of people.
It's really
but
not.
But my problem is I just don't see them kind of like, especially Putin, and everybody's like this madman. He's not going to like go back with his tail between his legs.
And that's the thing.
That's the thing. That's the worry. Is the thing that's probably the big wild card.
Say you go out and you get into a fight that personally get into a fight that you understand you're going to lose. You can back out of it, right? As a person, you can say I'm sorry. You can apologize. I didn't mean that. You step back. He can't do that, right? So he has 2 options, and I think those 2 options are going to, again, I think this is going to go 1 or 2 ways. And this is my assessment. Either in about a week to 2 weeks to 3 weeks, we have a total collapse of the Russian ruble under the support of sanctions. We have a collapse of the Russian military in Ukraine because their lines of communications are so thinned out that they just run out of fuel. Right? Yeah. And there's this giant fiasco, and the forces and Putin's regime essentially collapses under that, or he goes all in. Right, he goes all in. He declares a mobilization in Russia because, again, you need about 2 to 3 million people to actually. And
he just does a draft. I guess they have lots of conscripts in Russia, right?
They do, but they're again, speaking of low quality males, right?
Those are the lowest value males, the ones who are just kind of like puttering around in the Russian army. Well, they're kids. They're like, it's like old
kids, right?
Yeah, they're like literally kids.
They're mostly Yeah, they're mostly, they're tired. They're young. They don't know what they're doing there. They haven't been trained enough. And it's not like, I think that one of the biggest images that's being shattered is this like myth of this rebuilt, repurposed, retrained, and high morale Russian army.
Yeah,
I think that's the biggest thing that's crashing. And yeah, I know that there's the media right now wants to paint it very one-sided, right? They want to say that Russia is just losing. But the fact remains that they're taking losses, they're taking casualties that they were not prepared to take.
Yeah.
They were not prepared for this to be any more than just literally a drive to Kiev. And
just like, hey, we're here, we're taking your thing.
We're here, here, give us our flowers, and Zelensky, goes on trial, but instead, what's happening is the opposite. There's like a consolidation of that nation, which they've never seen that. So kind of the joke was always that one day Putin's going to get a medal from the Ukrainian government for uniting their country.
Yeah. I mean, they're saying the same with NATO. Now, do you think there's any sort of scenario where some kind of general in Russia just takes out Putin, just kind of someone poisons his dinner and something like that, and then they're just all right?
That's my 2 to 3 week scenario, right? That's if this is over in 2 to 3 weeks. That's how it's.
Okay, who do you think has the greater chance of being dead first, Putin or Zelensky?
So I think that there is a 0% chance that Kiev will be taken.
You think 0? Are they not currently like surrounded?
Well, they can surround it all they want. The problem is, it's like
they still have to. They still have to surrender.
I don't know if you I don't know if you've ever been there.
I've never been there. No.
On the western side of the river, so there's a giant river that flows right through the middle of it. And on the western side of that river, it's the old city, and the old city is basically, it's like San Francisco.
Yeah.
It's tiny streets. It's very, very high elevation changes. You can get lost there, even if you're not, in a war.
Oh yeah, and especially if all the civilians are armed, then you're fucked.
Yeah, for the first 4 months of living there, I would get lost like every week, just wandering the streets. So driving in tanks through there, it's like you're driving to your certain death.
Yeah, and then if you're walking through there, then the civilians are just gonna be shooting at you because they're all armed.
Yeah, and the other side of the river, it's all block apartment buildings, it's all projects.
Yeah.
Right. So like neither of those sides of the river are necessarily good for advancing using traditional Russian tanks. It's a mismatch between what they want to do and what they can do.
So then what do you think? Just some sort of stalemate? Where they just kind of, or what? They just kind of surround them and they bring in they have airstrikes? Like, do they have the capacity? Do they have the capacity to drop an airstrike and just level Kiev? Like, just, I mean,
they could. They certainly could try that. But again, if you go back to Russian history, and there are two conflicts in Chechnya, the entire and people talk about that. That's a huge trauma for the Russians. There are two kind of failed wars in Chechnya. Well, the second one was semi-success, but the entire region, the entire republic, or used to be kind of semi-independent nation of Chechnya, has a population of 1.2 million people. That's all the cities, all the villages, all the mountains, right?
Yeah,
and that's like 2 years. Just the city of Kiev is 4.5 million people.
Yeah, it's big.
Just one city. It's enormous. It's an enormous city. It has
Plus, the mayor is the fucking former heavyweight champion of the world in boxing.
Yes, he is. Yeah,
fucked up. Imagine you're like a soldier. You're just like some punk ass 18-year-old Russian soldier, and you come across that dude.
Yeah, and that's
a nightmare.
No, Klitschko's there. Yeah, Klitschko.
Both of them, both the Klitschko brothers.
Guys, they all have political differences, right? And that's the other thing that before the conflict was happening, the former president of Ukraine, Poroshenko, and Zelensky and Klitschko, they were at each other's throats.
Yeah, like, it was an incredibly corrupt country, right? As far as I understand, like Ukraine.
Yeah, they all they had their own TV channels, they had their own propaganda. They were basically because Ukraine is a democracy, and the elections are fierce. Right, This is like the Democrats versus the Republicans. But you add like 6 more parties to that list, and everybody's vying for power.
Sounds like Canada.
But the second those troops cross the border, that country united like it's never been united before.
Yeah, which you would assume. I mean, that probably the biggest calculation is just assuming that they were going to keep fighting.
That's what I can't get past is this giant miscalculation, this giant misunderstanding of the reality on the ground, and which leads me to believe that if he was fed bad intelligence and it was that bad, it's basically because he didn't want to hear any other intelligence.
Yeah. I mean, he doesn't. I don't see the vibe of the people around him wanting to tell him no. Really, ever.
Yeah, because I know anybody who tells him no or anybody who challenges him, it basically gets
disappear.
First thrown out of right. You look at all the opposition. Like, well, what opposition? Right? They're all either dead or in exile. Right? And those are the people who that's your feedback mechanism. Right? Right, that's like if you're a politician, you need the opposition to basically constantly poke you to essentially kind of at least guide you into some sort of reality. And that miscalculation, it's.
Do you think any possibility of like some sort of revolution in Russia, where the people just kind of?
I think that's what everybody's watching for, right? I think because there's always this. With the sanctions, right? Like there's always this narrative. Oh, we want to hurt the oligarchs, we want to hurt his inner circle, but we don't want to really hurt the people, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what we've done to Iran and places like that throughout our history. But these sanctions are they're hitting common Russians, right? Imagine their inflation when ruble was 75 last week. Yeah. Now it's 150.
Oh, it's insane.
Right, that's double. So every single thing you buy just doubled in price.
I mean, I'll tell you, I will give no further details than what I'm about to say, but on the weekend, I was hanging out with the daughter of a Russian oligarch, and she does not seem too bothered about it.
Well, yeah, because if you go from having 100 million to 50, you're probably okay, right? But imagine that if your subsistence is about the equivalent of
$5 a day or something, now it's $2.50.
The average Russian salary is about, let's say 30,000 rubles, which is about $500 a month, right?
Yeah.
But now everything all your budgets just doubled, right?
That's what I'm saying. And all your imports of all your fancy American goods you like,
Yeah, and then that's the thing. Like, there is no internal production of any of that stuff. And they're like, oh, we produce food. It's not actually true because all the components of modern food are actually imported.
I mean,
right?
They do produce wheat. I know they're like one of the biggest wheat importers, and they are a major oil exporter. But I guess there is a scenario where some countries might call their bluff and be like, you know what, keep your fucking oil. And we'll make do. I don't know how they'd make do without it. I don't know if that's just me not really understanding the scenario, but it seems like they were very much banking on the fact that there would be no scenario where they're no longer selling their oil.
Well, I mean,
funds the whole situation.
The second they invaded, they lost that pipeline, the Nord Stream pipeline that was supposed to go into operation.
Right, yeah.
And they invested $11 billion into that. That's just lying there on the seafloor now. That's never going to get used. So they were ready to part with that right off the bat. But the sanctions were pretty interesting. What they did was, again, they sanctioned the Russian central bank, not allowing them to actually intervene in the
like to prop up the ruble, because essentially they would have just basically supported it.
Last Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, the ruble was actually only up like 3 to 5%.
Uh-huh.
Because the second people started dumping it, the Russian central bank came in.
Yeah, they just come in and buy it. I mean, if you look at the chart of the ruble for people who are investing in crypto, it literally looks like a rug pull of a shitcoin. It's just like
and what they did over the weekend was they took that away from them. They took their ability to buy currency. And on Monday, the Moscow stock market didn't open. Their biggest
it still hasn't opened.
I don't think it hasn't opened.
They didn't open it today either. They're just kind of hoping
because
they're kind of just hoping this like problem will go away, and then they'll reopen it and they'll be like, it's all good now. Interesting. Okay, Alex, thank you very much. I don't want to take up too much more of your time. But you know what? We'll have you back because you seem like you know what you're talking about, and and I'm sure this is not going to be the end of this conflict. So we'll definitely have you back. Is there anywhere where you have people like to follow you? Anything? If you're into that, people.
Well, I am in academia, and it's, there is no such thing as cancel culture, right?
Yeah.
So we're, I technically don't have a Twitter account, or even though I contacted you on.
Gotcha.
On Twitter, but
Gotcha. I gotcha.
that's
Well,
for
you know
to go
what?
out
If
there
you're
and-
if you're going to SUNY Binghamton and you're looking for a
Oh.
teacher or some shit, I don't know if that even
Well,
makes sense.
I'm
but
sure you probably pass through Binghamton when you're driving up to Toronto, right? Because
Yeah,
that's the last Tim,
absolutely.
That's the last Tim Hortons on the way. Yeah.
Okay, cool, man. Thanks, Alex. I appreciate you very much, and we'll talk soon.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'll be in touch.
Okay,
Have a
take
good
care.
one.